TRAVERS.
Point given, pulling away to win through the stretch by 3.
It's Wajima now drawing away to lead by 5 lengths.
Mateliadoro wins the TRAVERS Stakes by a hard-fought neck over repent, and Little Birdstone digs down. The cliff's edge could not get to him in the darkness at Saratoga.
Bernardini is pouring it on and he's pulling away. Bernardini, brilliant once again.
Street Sense and Grasshopper under the line, and Street Sense prevails. The winner of the TRAVERS and the Belmont is Thunderbird.
And the stage is set in the TRAVERS, but here comes Viide with a final try. Who will win the TRAVERS? It will be Too Close to Call. And the stage is set in the TRAVERS. Will take charge is surging, and it's a photo finish. It's Too Close to Call. And the stage is set in the TRAVERS.
American Pharaoh has lost the lead at the top of the stretch, and here on the far outside comes Keen Ice. Keen Ice has got him. Keen Ice has won the TRAVERS over American Pharaoh in a dramatic upset.
And the stage is set in the TRAVERS.
General Assembly extending to an 8-length lead, and Smartin is second. General Assembly in front.
And the stage is set in the TRAVERS.
It is Arrowgate and Mike Smith. What a commanding performance. He won the TRAVERS by 12 in a final time of 1 minute 59.36 seconds. The fastest TRAVERS ever.
And the stage is set in the TRAVERS.
Code of Honor is now making his move, and he's closing on the outside. Code of Honor, Mucho Gusto, and Tacitus. Code of Honor has taken the lead, and Code of Honor and John Velasquez have won the Run Happy TRAVERS.
Cortland Simmons with you here at the CS Racing Report, and this is the 150th TRAVERS Stakes recap, won by Code of Honor, ridden by John R. Velasquez, trained by fellow Hall of Famer Claude R. McGahee III, better known as Shug, winning his 4th TRAVERS. He won it in 1989 with the incomparable Easy Goer, the following year with Rhythm, and then of course he won it with Coronado's Quest, ridden by Mike Smith, owned by the Jannies. He adds a 4th TRAVERS trophy to his resume with a resounding 3-length victory, Code of Honor, over Tacitus, who was a half length in front of Mucho Gusto, who was a length and a quarter in front of Endorsed. And the splits for this race, a race in which, interestingly enough, the blinkers were a factor in this TRAVERS Stakes in terms of it dictating the early portion of the race, because Tacitus not only was forwardly placed, but he battled for the lead, got it early, and then was overtaken by Mucho Gusto as Tax, coming out of the 12 hole, stalked those two horses, sat in a very, very nice spot. 23.11 was the first quarter mile as those two horses, Mucho Gusto and Tacitus, sort of exchanged the lead. 47.26 for the half, 3/4 and 111.21. So the pace was, as I said, legitimate, moderate to legitimate, certainly not slow in compared to the Jim Dandy. The mile 135.49 as Tacitus and Mucho Gusto really kind of controlled the front portion or the front end of the race. Tax sitting in a chilly spot there as they hit the mile in 135.49. And then on the turn, something happened, something that, of course, I had picked, even though I picked a number of scenarios, my trifecta of superfectas and the upset special, which was Tacitus. Code of Honor began to build up a head of steam, and he started, as Tom Durkin used to call it back in the day, he's ready to roll, and that's exactly what Code of Honor was doing as he was picking up other horses who were struggling to get into stride. Comes on the outside, 4 wide. In my description, I have Code of Honor basically going 4 wide, accelerating past these horses as Mucho Gusto briefly held the lead over Tacitus, who had the lead going on to the turn. Mucho Gusto overtook him from the outside and about the 2 path. Looked like for a moment there the Bob Baffert trainee was going to win and out-battle Tacitus. The two of them were in their own private battle as Code of Honor got on the hip of Mucho Gusto, blew by, and as I described, 4 wide, moved into 3 wide, accelerated, went clear to win by 3. 3. Mucho Gusto and Tacitus, as I said, were in their own private battle once Code of Honor blew by, and Tacitus was just able by a half length to get up in front of Mucho Gusto was third, as I said, a length and a quarter in front of Endorsed. Owendale, ran evenly in here, was right in there. You could see his silks, looking and with an opportunity to emerge and burst and accelerate the way Code of Honor did, which is the reason why I made him my final pick, is that burst of acceleration, that lovely turn of foot that gave you sort of the earmarks or the belief that he would be able to float over that Saratoga surface, which can be, as I said in the past, can be deep and tiring. And that's the reason why I liked him in here, in addition to the fact he broke his maiden there, even though the question mark in my mind, as well as some of you out there, was the one prep since the Kentucky Derby finishing second, elevated to third to second off the maximum security disqualification. Was it enough, the Dwyer on July the 6th, was it enough of a prep to get the bottom underneath him to get ready for this race with about 6.5 weeks to prepare? Obviously it was. I thought that even though it was a issue that was one to be concerned about, I just thought that the aforementioned upside to Code of Honor was going to put him in the winner's circle this time. As much as I like Mucho Gusto all year long, I wasn't as confident he would go the mile and a quarter, and you can look back at that preview podcast for those who might not believe me to corroborate that story. Endorsed ran evenly. As I said before, I didn't think the horse is coming out of the curl, and anytime you run a 152 point whatever, that is a lot of improving to have to do, even with horses that may not run their optimum best at a mile and a quarter. So you had to believe that, that marked improvement, what I call significant improvement, was going to be highly unlikely, but Endorsed ran, I think, reasonably well to where, Kieran McLaughlin is going to have to make a decision as to whether the Pennsylvania Derby looks good for him. Maybe the Jockey Club Gold Cup, which, as I had mentioned before, was going to be Code of Honor's next spot, and unless there's some sort of change in the planning, that's where he's going to go. I've said before that this was going to be the upgrade, or the cycle of sort of the upward cycle for Code of Honor, that off the 8 furlongs he should run reasonably well at 10, well enough in my mind to win it. Obviously, it wouldn't have surprised a lot of people if he ended up being a little short and people then conjecturing he couldn't go a mile and a quarter, but I always thought he would run well enough to put himself in a position to improve in the Gold Cup. He's done what I thought he would do. He won this race, confirming that in every scenario I picked that he was going to be in the mix, in the top 3 for sure, and he certainly lived up to that promise. And now he has an opportunity to maintain that level or upgrade himself from this 201.05 at the mile and a quarter, carrying only 121 pounds, getting a 5-pound weight allowance, being a 3-year-old running against older horses of what we call weight for age conditions in the Jockey Club Gold Cup at Belmont Park, a track we know he likes based on what he did in the Champagne as a 2-year-old and also his performance in the Dwyer prior to this victory in the Midsummer Derby. So, as I said before, going back to Owendale, he had an opportunity to make up the ground and contend here. He ran evenly. I don't think it was a bad, what we call death sentence in terms of his ability to run a mile and a quarter. It was a nice run. It wasn't really what Brad Cox and those who backed him was looking for. Highest honors was 6, and then Tax was the big disappointment, finishing 7th. He was in the ideal stalking trip, as Jay Pribben would always say, and for that matter, any other broadcaster or handicapper or fan. He's in the catbird seat, sitting behind 2 horses in a speed duel, maybe not a suicidal one, but they were both working hard, Mucho Gusto and Tacitus, and Tax had every opportunity to close in on this. He was well ahead of Code of Honor. He had first run on most of all the stalker, the deep or the mid-pack and deep closers, and he wasn't able to finish. So he finishes 7th, and of course you see the rest of the order of finish there for the Run Happy Travers Stakes. Again, Code of Honor has definitely put himself in a position where he's in a virtual tie. If you don't think he's in the absolute lead in the 3-year-old division, he beat pretty much the majority of all the good 3-year-olds. People are going to maybe sort of knock his victory down a notch or two because Game Winner and Maximum Security, the winner of the Haskell, wasn't in the field. But when you beat a number of nice horses and you win the Midsummer Derby, I don't care who's in the field, it is a jewel that is very coveted one to capture. And Code of Honor was able to do that once again in 201.05, winning by 3 over Tacitus. People are going to, go and make another excuse for him that he was too forwardly placed. And I would say that I would pretty much 95% agree that he probably was a little closer or showed a little more speed than what we thought with the blinkers. I think ideally the best run for him would be maybe to sort of sit back behind a horse like Mucho Gusto or where Tax was, sitting, second, third, fourth, and then let someone else do the heavy lifting. And I think that will improve his finish if he is, of course, as Jose Ortiz said, going forward. And he ran a good race. Again, Tacitus is a check cutter. If he isn't what we call a brilliant or a superstar of Hall of Fame stature, he is a horse that's going to get you checks, and it'll be very interesting to see if he goes to the Gold Cup, where that puts him and Bill Mott and the connections and Jose Ortiz for the Breeders' Cup, because, again, I don't think he has this electric turn of foot, but some of these older horses may take a step back and he may have an opportunity to cash in, and who knows, maybe his picture will get taken. Code of Honor doesn't run as well as he did here in the Travers, or he gets in traffic trouble. So I do think that the tactics for Tacitus are well intended. And he ran second here, so I think it was a good race for him. Mucho Gusto, again, I don't think this is a death sentence either on his ability to go a mile and a quarter. We know he likes Santa Anita, and so if Bob Baffert caves into the belief that this horse really was, overachieving just to try to get 10 furlongs, then we won't see him in the Classic picture. We'll see him in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. So therefore, the Pennsylvania Derby is a likely spot because he would get enough time to at least be well prepared for the mile. But I still think, and I think some would say, this was a good enough run where at Santa Anita, where we know he's won 3 graded races, that he could run very, very well and improve enough to be right in the mix. So these 3-year-olds, I think, definitely made what I would call an equal, if not higher graded forward step in terms of where they stand amongst the 3-year-olds and against the older horses, as Code of Honor obviously is the top at the top of the list, at least going a mile and a quarter. And again, a great performance by him. 4th Travers win for Shug McGahee. So Code of Honor wins the 150th Travers Stakes by 3 lengths over Tacitus, with Mucho Gusto third for trainer Shug McGahee and fellow Hall of Famer John R. Velasquez. Code of Honor, the winner of the 150th Travers Stakes.
Mike Smith asking Holy Bull for everything he has. Concern is coming hard under Jerry Belly, but it is Holy Bull as game as a racehorse can be, coming down to the wire. Holy Bull wins! What a hero! Smith all over Coronado's Quest. A final surge from Victory Gallop. Photo finish. Coronado's Quest, Victory Gallop, and Raffy's Majesty. 3 noses on the line.
It is Arrowgate and Mike Smith. Oh, they've opened up a 6-length lead here with 1 furlong to run. They've left the field reeling behind. Arrowgate, what a commanding performance. He won the Travers by 12. Oh, what a race he ran today in a final time of 1 minute 59.36 seconds. The fastest Travers ever.
Approaching the 16th pole, General Assembly extending to an 8-length lead, and Smart in his second, General Assembly in front. Brian's time seeking the goal, getting ground on the outside of 49er, loose 3 past 16 pole. It's seeking the goal, and 49er to the wire, seeking the goal, and 49er on the inside.
Catholic boy is pulling away. He's so impressive today, the others didn't even have a prayer. Catholic boy rolls in the run. Happy Travers.
Highest Honors is next, and Code of Honor is now making his move, and he's closing on the outside. Tacitus has been put to a full-out drive. Mucho Gusto. Code of Honor is gaining ground to the far outside, and Dorst is coming down the center. Owendale and Highest Honors too. They're into the final furlong. Code of Honor, Mucho Gusto, and Tacitus. Code of Honor has taken the lead, and Code of Honor and John Velasquez have won the run. Happy Travers. Tacitus was second, and then it was Mucho Gusto and Dorst and Owendale, and a final time of 2:01.05. It was Code of Honor's day.